Welcome to the Mission First People Always podcast. We're glad you're here. And now our host, Dr. Mike Patterson.
It's Dr. Mike Patterson, your host of the Mission First People Always podcast, where we talk about what it takes to be a great leader and how to build great teams. I'm also the author of the book, Mission First People Always, the definitive guide to balancing people and performance. It's available on Amazon or wherever you buy your books online. And if you don't have a copy, you need a copy. Get a copy because it will help you be a better leader and bring out the best in your people. I'm also a trainer and a consultant focused on leader and team development. You can learn more about what I do at drmikepatterson.com. Now, let me remind you, as I always do, that I would appreciate it greatly if you would subscribe or follow, leave a review, tell a friend about our podcast, because the reason we do the podcast, the only reason we do the podcast is to help people lead better and bring out the best in those around them. This is a labor of love, so help us spread the love. Tell someone about the podcast. Let's get the word out. Now, I'm glad you're here with us today because you're really going to enjoy this episode. The reason I'm excited about today's episode is because my guest is doing some really innovative stuff at scale as the head of learning and development at one of the world's best known companies, a company that just happens to be 170 years old with a portfolio of the world's most iconic brands. He is getting people excited about learning and development from the top of the house all the way down the line to frontline supervisors, and that's no small feat. He's scaling his initiatives to impact thousands of lives across the organization each year. So if you've ever wondered how a successful learning strategist, a learning executive, thinks about developing people across a large organization, you've come to the right place.
Welcome to the Mission First People Always podcast, where we talk about better business results, stronger teams, more successful careers, and happier lives. Along the way, we hope to bust some biases, build some bridges, and have some fun. We're glad you're here. And now, our host, Dr. Mike Patterson.
My guest today is Dr. Kevin Claypool. He's the North American head of learning and development for Anheuser-Busch, the world's top brewer, and he's based at their St. Louis headquarters. He's a graduate of York University in Nebraska and Abilene Christian University, and he earned his doctorate at Pepperdine University's Graduate School of Education and Psychology. Kevin was actually one of my doctoral students several years ago, and I'm so very proud of all that he has done and will continue to do in his career. I'm impressed with his accomplishments, but I'm even more impressed. What I really love about Kevin is his heart for people and his passion for seeing them grow, develop, and fulfill their potential. He's going to get you excited about learning and development just because his enthusiasm, his energy is contagious. So, Kevin, welcome to the Mission First People Always podcast.
Is this your first time live and in studio here?
It is my first live in studio episode. And so you're doing something special and unique, and I'm just grateful that you're here.
Well, I'm thankful to be here. Thanks for hosting me at your house and in the studio here. You know, everybody can have an own podcast studio in their house, but nonetheless,
mine is special. Come on. Mine is a special place.
Well, like you said last night, you should get the on-air sign that right outside your door so people will know.
That's right. Well, I'm excited to have this conversation with you because I think a lot of my listeners are interested in what you're doing. I've got a lot of learning leaders that listen, and they're striving to do the kind of good work you're doing in Anheuser-Busch. So I want to try to get into your head this morning and reveal how you think about your work. And we can call it, we can find some sort of right cliche to use, get under the hood or, learn how we're making the sausage or whatever, silly cliche we want. But I really do want to understand how you think about your work as a learning leader and reveal some of that to the audience. So you ready?
Let's do it. Love it.
All right. So before we start talking about your current initiatives, let's take a little trip down memory lane. You've been in your role now, 3 years or so? So let's see if you can remember what it was like in your early days. You've got this big job, you're new, it's a large organization, you don't really know anyone. So how'd you get your footing and gain credibility in the organization?
Man, I tell you what, I actually really love telling this story because when I started at Anheuser-Busch, I was transitioning from being in the higher education space to being in the corporate training space, right? Where there's a lot of similarities and there's a lot of crossover. But I always say that I love to tell this story because I figured out that the love language of corporate is much different than what you would see in higher ed. And an example was when my first boss, her name was Amy Newman. She was a fantastic boss. And I remember she challenged me to create this new capstone project for our most senior executive training program. And I was like, okay, yeah, let me go to the drawing board. And I went to Microsoft Word, as most higher education professionals do, and did my research, did my APA formatting, and wrote a 5 to 6 page document. And I gave it over to her, and she was like, yeah, this is fantastic. I love it. Could you turn this into one slide? And I realized I was in a totally different space at that point. And so I think for me, I think gaining credibility or momentum was leaning into my talents and the gifts that I knew that I had so that I could instantly create a little bit of momentum and trust that, oh, hey, this guy knows something of what he's doing. And then what you have to do is, I think, and Mike, you know about this, about the overdone strength kind of concept from core strengths, is that I didn't want to lean too much into that to give people the impression that I wasn't flexible. And so I tried to make sure that whatever I delivered, I started to ask questions. Hey, would this resonate with these folks? What format should this be in? What should I focus on? Where are people going to get lost in the minutia and the details? Even though I know we needed the details, I not everybody needed to know. Sometimes people are on that need to know basis, right? And so I think for me, it was just about how do I adjust my approach a little bit while still leaning into my strengths.
Yeah, and one of the things I know about you, Kevin, is that you're very relational. You love people. You meet people easily. You build rapport. You build relationship. So I have to think that was a big part of your success story.
Oh man, I mean, relationships are key. I mean, anything worth doing in life, if you think about any success you've ever had, it is most likely nested in the quality of the relationships that you build with your teammates and coworkers and those that you influence. And so for sure, I think anytime you start a job or in a new environment, the first like 2 to 3 months is you simply getting people to know your name and know what you're capable of doing. And then once they know what you're capable of doing, they begin to ideate, oh, maybe we could ask Mike to do this or Kevin to do that. And then they come to you with the request of what they need versus you just giving them what they want.
Yes.
And I think it's a big difference.
Speaking of requests, there's no shortage of good stuff you can do in the training space. And sometimes executives come in with requests, and they one of the things that we as learning leaders are fighting against at times is becoming order takers and order fillers, because the executives read a book, they've gone to a conference, they saw a TED talk, and they say, hey, we want that. And so you as a learning leader have to determine how to respond and whether it's right to respond. So how do you prioritize your initiatives, serving your internal customers well, but also keeping an eye on the strategic approach to leadership development or talent development that you're pursuing? How do you do that?
That's a good question. And I'll tell you, I'm going to give you 2 answers. And the first one is, I'll tell you a quick story that'll take super fast, but is that about 5 years ago, I authored a learning methodology that I call 4K learning. And it was a simple approach because I started to think about how do you begin to engage with a client, right? We'll call them that, and truly give them what they need, right? Like, how do you do that? And a lot of times we begin to we listen, right? So you have to have that active listening approach to it. And we start listening to what they're telling you. And then you simply just walk down that road. And the reality is you may be walking down the wrong road.
Yeah.
And so what I started to do was, in this 4K learning, we ask 4 questions. We say, what do you want people to know? What do you want them to understand? What do you want them to do? And who do you want them to be? If you can answer those 4 questions, then you get knowledge, wisdom, tactical application, and cultural application, right? So when you can paint the picture of we're going to deliver content, which I would call competence, right? So you can deliver that, but then you've got to make sure that you also elevate the confidence of an individual so that they can go, act, do, and be something different today than they were yesterday, having now engaged in this training request. So one of the things that happened is when I brought that methodology to Anheuser-Busch, one of my colleagues, Devin Hasty, took that and said, hey, let's turn this into an intake. So now we take this 4K methodology, we use it as a learning intake, almost like a needs assessment. We ask those 4 questions. Those 4 questions spur on the subsequent questions that you would want to ask and kind of engage with. Now that you've got that information, we walk out of those meetings with a better rendering of what's needed for our client base versus just the initial idea. Because that's when you bring 2 people together or a team of people together, those collective minds and perspectives actually bring about a more clarified picture than what you would have had otherwise.
Yeah. None of us are as smart as all of us.
Yeah, that's probably a better way to say that.
What, I know you've got a lot going on, and you're actually in town this week. We're doing this in Southern California, and you're on your way to a big conference with all of your folks, all your key folks. What are some of the key areas of development you're focusing on for Anheuser-Busch this year? What's sort of on the top of your to-do list as a learning leader this year?
Yeah, I'll talk about one of them that's probably the biggest priority we have this year as a learning organization is what we'll call middle manager development.
Okay.
Right. And one of the stats that we looked at, was that when we look at a certain band level or like leadership level within the organization, in the onset, in the aftermath of COVID, you had this reshuffling of the workforce, right? So some people would call it the great resignation or whatever, key term they would coin to this. But there was a reshuffling of the workforce, and Anheuser-Busch isn't the only one dealing with it. It's any other company out there, they're dealing with this reshuffling. And because of that, you have a changeover in leadership, right? And when you have a changeover in leadership, that can create opportunities and challenges, right? And so with that, one of the challenges that we saw that was created was within this certain band level, the middle manager band level, 40% of those managers are brand new to management.
And part of that's driven by demographics, I would think, as well. You got younger people who are getting to that point.
Yep.
And this us old guys like me, yours truly, are starting to look toward retirement, and they're phasing out of their career.
100%, right? So that's that reshuffling. So people are deciding, like, I know a lot of folks, they were talking about in the onset of COVID, they're like, you know what? I'm close enough to retirement at this point. I don't want to have to deal with the mask. I don't want to have to deal with this. And it's time. It's time for me, right? So it gave people perspective. And so those demographics caused us to have a 40%, 40% of our managers to be new in management. And if you think about that from a cultural perspective, when you have that amount of individuals, because I think it's your definition of culture is like the way we do things around here. I believe I've heard you say that before. So if the way we're doing things around here, if 40% of the people doing things around here have never done management before, think about the cultural, like the implications that can have if left unintended.
Yeah.
Or
the great opportunity that exists if you're very intentional
100%
about moving those folks toward building the kind of culture you really want.
Exactly. So that's where we're making a focus. We're making a very intentional effort to say, we've got to make sure that we meet these folks where they are in their career versus expecting them to meet us where our curriculum is. So we had to rethink the way we thought about managing curriculum or leadership curriculum. And how do we meet them? What do they need? Do they need coaching? Do they need mentoring? Do they need competence building? How do we help them build their confidence? How do we create that safe sandbox for them to play in so that when they come out of it, they feel much more empowered as a leader and manager than they did before.
So in light of this transitioning workforce and the demographics and the great resignation and the post-COVID world you live in, what are some of the greatest challenges you're facing as a senior learning leader in your organization?
Time. I think time is...
Wait, if I would have asked that question to your predecessor 15 years ago, wouldn't they have said the same thing?
100%. And I think at any given moment, like you could articulate what the greatest challenges of the year about, like whether it's emotional intelligence, we've got to elevate emotional intelligence and or maybe it's conflict management skills, or insert whatever,
Yeah.
Attribute of leadership you want to. But for me, when I think about this, everybody has a finite amount of time. Priorities never change.
Yeah. The business doesn't stop.
That's right. Production still has to go.
Yeah, and especially in your world where you are running 24/7 all the time. You're a production company. You're manufacturing stuff. You're making beer, and the lines don't stop.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And so for me, the way time parlays into action is for us, our challenge is to become better storytellers.
Yeah.
And the reason why I say that is that if I can tell a more compelling story about what we have to offer from the learning space, people will make the time to engage in something meaningful. So now I know that there's a finite amount of time. So how do I engineer the best situation at the most efficient amount of time? And I bring it at the right moment in the cycle of their work. So if I think about like our production team, in the summer is what we call it's their busy season, right? So it's the summer selling season.
Right.
So because people are going to the lake and they're going on vacations and kids are out of school. So
And a cold beer tastes just a little better in the summer.
Yeah, especially when you're mowing the grass,
Yeah.
right? And so whenever you're in those moments, we have to make sure that we're not saying, oh, we're going to do a major training event in June, right? That we're going to take X number of people off the production line or out of the leadership, and they're going to go 3 days to Washington, D.C. or the LA or wherever it is. And then we take them out of that. And then all of a sudden their mind isn't here at the training. It's back at the production factory or back in the office or whatever it is.
And there's nothing worse. And you and I have been done this long enough to recognize that there's nothing worse than to have a body in class, but the guy's always on his phone.
Yeah.
And he's always getting up to leave the room, and he's in and out. And you just want people who are present.
Yeah. The gift of presence in any situation, whether you are a facilitator presenting to a class, you being mentally and physically present to honor the folks that are in the class, big deal. And the same thing for the learner. Like if you're going to step into the learning situation, be present, not only just for the facilitator. Yes, it makes us feel good as facilitators.
It's respectful.
Right. But if you're going to take that time out of your schedule, make it worth it. 100%. 100%.
So you've been doing some innovative work since you've been in your position, and you've been using simulations more and more. And one of the really cool simulations I've heard you talk about is something called Brewing on Mars. Tell us a little bit about that, and how does it work, and what kind of impact you're seeing for that? Why is that? And I know you invested a lot of time and resources in that. Why is it worth it?
Yeah. So when you think about learning, I think as learning begins to change and morph over time, it's not simply, you can't just simply move the needle by having a sage from the stage, right? You just can't do that. And so you want, there's a quote, I'm going to botch this quote, but you'll get the point. And it says, if you tell me the truth, I'll remember. And then it says, if you tell me a story, my heart will remember forever. So when you think about having a storyline to a learning engagement, that's where you get simulations, right? So this Brewing on Mars, the storyline is Earth is overpopulated and we've got people living on Mars, and your job, your team's job is to build a successful brewery on Mars. And we built that on the same data that it takes to build a brewery here in the United States or in Canada or in China or Europe or wherever we're building a brewery. So you have like route to market. How long does it take to brew? Dealing with water supply and supply chain issues and the commercial pipeline. What does it take to sell and the demographics of what type of beer is better for the Hispanic market or for this market or for whatever it might be.
Real world business challenges.
100%. So we actually, a guy named Reed Butler on our team he works at Anheuser-Busch, and he actually built the simulation in Excel. And he was sending it out and would plant data with people. And then it's like, oh, call Mike and he'll give you this data set. And you would input it into this really elaborate Excel sheet. And it was a really cool idea. And Reed presented it to us and he's like, hey, I did this and we thought I'd want to show you. And I was like, oh, let me bring my colleague Devin Hasty in. And then we brought a company named C6, and they took that idea and built it into this digital simulation where basically it's like for all intents and purposes, it's almost like a video game. And so you log into the system and you have your dashboard. It's almost like mission control, right? And you're divided up into teams and you have to make strategic decisions by communicating with your team via the chat function inside the simulation. And like, if you and I were on a team together, you might have information that I need and I have information that you need, but it's up to us to begin to communicate well enough with one another and to figure out how do we make strategic decisions together in a bifurcated environment. How do we take leadership roles to say, hey, do we have everything we have on the table? Have you shared everything? Have you done all of this? Who's going to take the leadership role in that space? Are we going to be effective communicators? And can we think strategically? Those three areas are what we looked to accomplish in this Brewing on Mars. It takes about 4 hours to go through.
And do you do it in a special place or locale, or can you do it anywhere?
You can do it anywhere. All you need is a computer, right? So we've even done it on Zoom. Like, well, we'll have people, we break them out into their Zoom room. So they're there by themselves and they're chatting with their folks. And then we do, it's really nice to do face to face, of course, right? Cause then you can have teams come together and celebrate. We give people a trophy at the end of an astronaut that says Brewing on Mars on it, at the end, so they can put it on their desk as a
kind of like that MTV award looking trophy.
It actually looks similar to that, right? We got them off of, I think we got them off just like an Amazon type account. But it's really cool to see people engage in learning in a different way, right? So now they're able to say, oh, you should communicate better. Okay, I can tell somebody that, but when they've lost the game because they didn't communicate better, now they're like, ugh, especially the more competitive folks, they're like, man, I need to redo that,
Kevin, I know you have great support from your senior executives. You're able to interact with the people at the top of the house on a regular basis. How did that happen? I know learning leaders sometimes struggle with getting their senior leaders to buy in, and whether it's financially or just be supportive with words and actions. How did you get your senior leadership team to get behind the work you're doing?
I'll tell you from day one, whether it was my initial boss, Amy Newman, or my current boss, Katie, they both have been unbelievably supportive of fresh and new ideas because they saw the need of and the priority of leadership development. And they understood expertise. They knew I brought something different to the table. They also realized that we actually have a full team that by the time we're bringing ideas, we've already talked to our collective learning team. We're bringing a new idea forward. We've already done some due diligence. But I think at the end of the day, the reason why I think we've garnered so much trust and momentum in this is because we've had to elevate, and this goes back to storytelling. I can't just bring an idea. Hey, we want to build this Brewing on Mars and we're going to spend X number of dollars and it's going to be super cool.
And your listeners start scratching their heads saying, what's he talking about?
Yeah. They're like, what do you mean Brewing on Mars? This doesn't sound. So what we didn't even mention Brewing on Mars at first to say, we want to build a business simulation that affects leadership, communication, strategic thinking. Here's how we're going to do this. Here's an example of what it looks like in Excel, right? So we show this and then we say, now to make this memorable, we have to tell a story.
Yeah.
So we build a storyline into that and then we bring the renderings and we do it in the stage gates that it takes to tell a good story. And when you do that, people are then coming along for the journey. Any new idea is a journey. So you got to bring people along for that early on rather than bringing them in later. Because then by the time you're later on, you've already matriculated through all of the stage gates of understanding what is this about, all of those things. And if you don't bring them along, they're going to be scratching their head at the end. And so for us, I think we've just learned to tell a better story and bring people along for the ride.
Yeah. And since we're doing this from Southern California, the Los Angeles area, it made me think about, somebody with a creative idea for a movie or television show, and they're pitching their idea, hoping to get it greenlit, as they say, to move into the production phase. And it's no different in your world.
No.
So Kevin, I know you use, and I've benefited from this personally because we work together, you use internal facilitators and subject matter experts, and then you bring in people from the outside. Guys like me have been able to come in and work with your team and your organization. Why is it important to you to have a mix of both internal experts and external folks that come in and work with your team and your people?
Yeah, that's really good because I'll tell you, we have a internal, like when we talk about our program or our curriculum progression internally, we have a section that we say is this expert led or leader led. Leader led is folks that are internal our organization, and we need their internal perspective that's going to be super valuable to the content that we want to deliver. So we would use a leader led. And then for expert led, I call these pendulum smashing moments. Sometimes we need people to come in to challenge groupthink, to challenge the culture, to challenge the way we've done it around here, whatever it needs to be. We need someone that can come in and help us think differently about a problem or a situation or an opportunity that is always in front of us. And if we only continue to lean on folks internally, in the academic world, we'd call that academic inbreeding, right? So it's just the same things over and over and over again. We need a moment to smash somebody's pendulum to the other side of thinking. And by the time that pendulum settles back down to the middle, it's going to rest in a completely different spot now that you've had that pendulum smashing moment. And so for us, we want to make sure that we bring in experts externally to help smash that pendulum, bring leaders internally to bring the right context and historical knowledge and wisdom about the business. Those two things coming together is what makes a more well-rounded leader.
Yeah, I love that. You're doing some big things. You're in a big organization, but you figured out how to scale, take big some of your initiatives. One of the projects you and I have been working with this year, we've touched 1,300 people with classroom training. And last year in 2022, we're going to do maybe 2 or 3 times that many in 2023. So how do you scale initiatives in a large, very complex organization with people all over North America? How do you get that momentum, get that traction?
Yeah, what you're talking about, it's funny because I remember when we kicked off this program, after we have done the pilot with supply and kudos to Elise Goldhammer for doing the pilot with us. But after we did the pilot and we got it settled in and we reported out on it and we were ready to scale, what we did first is we said, okay, if we're going to scale, we got to get all the supplies, right? So when I say supplies, I'm using air quotes here if you could see me. And so it's getting the supplies together. So we had to make sure that we had the tokens for all of the psychometric, and that we had the pipeline to do the registration, and that we had facilitators and all those things. After we did that, what we tried to do is remove any barrier that made it hard to bring that to your team.
Yep.
So we started to think about how do we make this as simple as possible? Because at the end of the day, what we need is for people to engage in this curriculum so that it can actually change their behavior, change their way of thinking, enhance who they are, make them the best version of themselves, whatever it might be.
In other words, make it easy for them to say yes.
Yeah, that's a great way to put that. And so once we tried to do that, we started to get literally daily requests for this particular program. And what was crazy is when we bought it, we thought, well, hey, we'll get 1,000 credits. We might do 1,000 people this year, maybe. And, I think the final number now was a little over 1,500.
Wow.
When we looked at it at the end of December, more than 1,500 people had went through this program in a given year. And we had our external facilitators and internal facilitators going gangbusters to do this. But what it helped us do, and I think the momentum that helped drive this, was it started to create a common language of how to deal with conflict, how to communicate. It gave us the right tools. And all of us were working from the same baseline. And so when others would see this group of 1,500 people working from that common baseline, they're like, well, I want that too, And so then they would go tell their boss, or if they were the leader or the boss, they'd say, we're going to bring that to our team.
And that word of mouth, organic sort of energy that was created was really helpful. And it negated the need to do a lot of marketing and selling on your part. One leader tells another leader, hey, this is useful. It's good. It was a valuable use of our time. And then it just keeps the ball rolling like that.
Yeah. So it was a grassroots effort, 100%. And that almost feels better because what happened is, this like in learning where you say, are you pushing the learning or are they pulling the learning? And for us, this was our client group was most certainly pulling the learning from us, which was a validation that we were meeting the right people at the right place at the right time. And that's most certainly like a General McChrystal team of teams concept about right people, right place, right time.
So it's early in 2023, Kevin. What do you want to accomplish this year?
Oh man. I mean, I don't know that we have a long enough podcast, but I'll do a couple of things. I think for us, we have adopted a mindset internally that we say we want to go an inch wide and a mile deep. And what we mean by that is that we're trimming down some of the things that we've done in the past in order to focus on a smaller subset of initiatives. So that way we can actually take people through the longer journey of what it means to become more of an SME or to feel empowered or to feel confident. It takes longer to be able to help people feel confident in, let's use emotional intelligence, for example, if that's what we were going to use. It's not just a one and done, like, set it and forget it type thing where you can, I went to this training for 2 days and now I'm an emotional intelligent leader. Great.
Or 2 hours.
Yeah. Or 2 hours. Right. And so I think for us, we're going to go an inch wide, a mile deep in our contributions. Within that, some of the initiatives that we're looking at is, of course, executive leadership development, middle manager effectiveness. And then we're also in the middle of engaging in a 10-year strategy where we want to paint the picture of what does the next 10 years look like in order for us to not only maintain the momentum that we have, but we have desire to become best in class and world-class learning organization.
All right. Now, this is a deep thinker question, and we're nearing the end of our time. So you're a young guy, but let's look ahead 30 years. You're retired. You're sitting on the beach somewhere. You're sipping a cold drink, looking at the ocean. What do you want your legacy to be when you look back over your career as a learning leader, as an executive in this learning space? When you're sitting around thinking about your career, what are the highlights?
It's funny. I like this question a lot. I like thinking 5, 10, 20 years. I've never had a 30-year question, but I like it. But for me, what I hope is this. I hope that when people leave any learning engagement that I've had the privilege of being part of, I hope that it made them feel like they became a better human being rather than just a better worker.
I love that.
And we call that elevating human potential in our organization. And I just want people to know that if you take time to invest in what we're doing here, this will make you a better spouse, a better friend, a better coworker, a better lawn guy, a better whatever you're doing.
Better human being.
A better human being. And we want folks to feel confident in that space, that if you take the time to do this, it's not only going to make you a better worker at X organization that you're at, but it's going to make you a better human being across the board.
Excellent. So for those who have listened to the podcast before, you know that this is always my penultimate question with my guest. Kevin, give our listeners one thing that they can begin doing now that will make them a better leader or a better human being, perhaps in your case.
Yeah, I'll tell everybody this. When you're listening, I want you to listen to understand rather than listening to be understood. So I think a lot of times, if you've ever had that moment where you're talking with somebody and they start telling you a story and you start to finish the story in your head, you're like, oh yeah, I know where this is going. That is a complete dishonoring of the person that you're listening to. So if we take a moment to listen, to understand people for who they are, what they're bringing to the table, rather than predicting the future in our own head, you'll actually begin to understand people a little bit better.
Great advice. For people who have listened to our conversation today and they're excited about what you're doing, how can somebody connect with you and perhaps continue the conversation or just connect to follow what you're doing, your career? What's the best way to do that?
Yeah. I mean, I'll give 2 things. You can look me up on LinkedIn. So I'm Kevin Claypool on LinkedIn. And you can email me at kevin.claypool@anheuser-busch.com. I'm happy to take an email, but love to connect with anybody.
Awesome. And we'll put that information in the show notes. Kevin, thanks for being a great guest. The inaugural in-studio interview for Mission First People Always podcast was awesome. Thanks to you.
Thank you, Mike.
Hey, this has been a great conversation. Thanks for listening. If you like what you've heard today, subscribe or follow, leave a review, and tell a friend. You can learn more about what I do and connect with me at drmikepatterson.com.
Thanks for listening. We hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you want to create a stronger, more people-centric and empowered culture for your organization, visit drmikepatterson.com.